Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Doubting Tim Show. Again, I'm here joined by Chris and Isaiah, and we are happy to be back for another week. This week, we are going to talk about leadership. And I'm very excited to talk about leadership because, for those of you who don't know, I'm getting my master's in leadership at Lourdes University here in Sylvania, Ohio. So, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, gentlemen, and let you guys start this discussion. So we're talking about leadership. What is leadership? I challenge you to answer my question.
Um,
I
Well, one
mean,
of the
I just want to say,
go
technically,
ahead.
it was Chris's question, but
This is Chris's question.
it was his topic.
All right,
so
it's
I'm
Chris's
just saying.
topic. It's Chris's topic.
Okay,
You are correct.
go ahead, Chris.
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, and actually, I think it'll be really interesting, Tim, to get some of your perspective and what they have been, what you have been studying in school. Because one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it is that I think there is a large divide and a large gap between how the Bible views leadership and how our world views leadership. Um, and again, I don't know exactly what you're learning in your classes, but what I see in a lot of places, especially with our um, political leadership, and I'm not saying necessarily president, but all over,
Yep.
everything that I see there is just very different from what the Bible talks about.
Mhm.
Um, so, some of the things, just talking about before we get into, you know, how to lead and what it means to be a leader and what leadership looks like. Just talking about um, why it's important, and why it is important to know what leadership looks like. Um, as we talked about last week, God did create us to rule over the earth, to rule over the animals, and to watch over His creation. So that, in a very large sense, is part of it. But then also, if we look at the New Testament, Paul talks about in several places the church being a body, being Christ is the head, the church is the body, and we all have different parts and different roles. And so that means some people are going to be leading and some are going to be following.
Mhm.
But I think going deeper than that, it really also means that at different times, all of us are leaders and all of us are followers, just depending on what situation we're in and, what God has put in front of us in that moment. And so knowing how to be both of those things, how to lead and how to follow, are both very important things to know when it comes to, um, living out God's will in your life.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
there's
Before I give it to Zay for his definition, I'm excited to talk about that because one of the things when we start to share this whole thing that you guys are going to realize is that the differences that divide you're talking about doesn't actually come in the leadership perspective. A lot of contemporary study on leadership actually bears most of its roots from religious texts and primarily the role of Jesus, but it's in followership. So when we get to explain that, it'll be interesting. Zay, what do you think of leadership?
Well, what do I think of it? It's an interesting.
Well, like with
As far as
Chris's,
defining
with
it,
Chris's topic, why do you think it's important to bring up
why do I think
leadership?
it's important?
Why do you think it's important to talk about leadership?
Because Chris talked more about I think it is important to understand. I think that a lot of, especially in our generation, a lot of our examples of people who are called leaders have been negative. Most people I know, at least, there's this sense of like just whenever you talk about who's in a position of authority, whether or not they're actually a leader, which we'll talk about, obviously, most of them aren't, but authority, people who are in charge, are usually seen in a very negative light due to many circumstances. But I think the culture has been built in such a way that there's a disrespect for position because of lack of leaders and lack of leadership. and that the lack of character that exists in the people who have been put in authority has caused a lot of that over time, and that doesn't mean that every guy or girl or whatever in a position has been negative, but I think vastly there's been this movement towards chaos has been seen as a better option than having poor leadership or
Hmm.
poor people in position.
Mhm.
I don't want to call it leadership because it isn't, right? We're going to define what leadership really is. And so I think that it's important because a lack of leadership has developed a bitterness and a lot of offense, a lot of disconnect and discord because there's an unwillingness to follow
True.
due to this perception that leadership is done poorly, or the people who are called
Right.
leaders aren't actually leading, and that has created this really bad don't like to follow. And so I think it is important
Yep.
to know what it is because the Bible does put down definitions of what leadership is and that they are important to have leaders in your life and to be a leader. So I think it's good we're talking about it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll start by saying is when we understand that leaders, okay, and you talked about we have people in position who are leaders. Um, One of the big misunderstandings is that being in a position of power does not make you a leader. The president of the
Hmm.
United States is not synonymous with leader. We take the term leader and we try to make it synonymous with superior, and it's not. You can be somebody's superior anywhere in the world. It does not mean you're their leader. And just like you can be a follower of someone and not be their subordinate. Those words don't go hand in hand. They're not synonymous. But the this like business driven, economic driven world has made it so that everything comes from the top down. You listen no matter what, no questions asked, no nothing. Some of that overlaps, a lot of it doesn't. Most of it doesn't. One of the biggest issues that I have with the way we get explained leadership is that in order to be a leader, you have to be going somewhere. You are not the person, you are not the objective, you are not the idea that's being followed. People are following you to a thing. They are following you to an objective, to a moment, because of a cause. And so if I'm a leader in a business, I might have goals. And so if I lead just by trying to get people goals and they're following me for those, well, I'm not much of a leader because I'm very objective based, I'm very performance based. I'm using those terms for a reason. We're just trying to get people from point A to point B. I'm not developing characteristics, I'm not developing a personality. I will do my plug this week. The Leadership Challenge. Okay? This is the Leadership Challenge. It's by Coutts and Posner, and we used it. It's like one of the best books that you can read when you start to get into leadership. And I was explaining to Zay before we started this. Leadership encompasses 5 major characteristics. Okay? And here they are. The first characteristic is model the way. The second is inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. If you are able to do those 5 things, you are considered a leader. You are becoming a leader if you start to do a few of those things, but you are a leader once you can do all of those things. So now, when you hear me say just those things, where do you think of and how do you think of that relating to what the Bible teaches us? Chris.
Um, well, a lot of it, I mean, it's definitely true. I do think all five of those things are very true. And, you know, for this specifically, I wanted to talk about, as in all things, Jesus is the example of how to be a leader. Um, and what he modeled is what, you know, I have called and I have heard other people call is called servant leadership. That um, if you are leading, you have to serve those you are leading. Um, and so, those things that you said are all things that I had written down as things that Jesus had done
Mm-hmm.
as a leader of his disciples in the Bible. Um, like you said, um, Give me a couple of them again. Or
Model the way, challenge the process, enable others to act, inspire a shared vision, and encourage the heart.
oh, well, yeah. I mean, those are all things obviously Jesus
Yes,
did.
this
The
is it's
modeling,
not a trick question. All five of them are Jesus.
yes, absolutely. The modeling, the and I think the one of the ones that's very important that a lot of people don't recognize is what you said is enabling others to do it, to accomplish their tasks. And that's something,
Mhm.
Jesus did many different times with his disciples. And, ultimately, when it came down to Jesus' ministry being finished and him leaving and going back to the Great Commission, um, he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given unto me. Now you go and make disciples of all nations. So he is right there. That's that enabling people to go, enabling your followers to go and accomplish what you have set out before them. Um, I think the one thing that I think needs to be added to what to what you laid out there, the one thing that is, um, well, you said, inspiring towards a shared vision, and that is, in what it should be is God's will.
Mhm.
And so seeking God's will and seeking that in those situations, I think is very important. Um, and then just the aspect of being a servant. You know, Jesus said, when he washed his disciples' feet, he said, I am your Lord and Master, and now I have done this for you, so you must do this for others.
Correct.
Um, Teaching that, like you said, even though you are in the position of leadership, you are not you are not better, you are not more important than the people who are under you.
Right.
And it is up to you to ensure that they know that they are important and that they are a part of what you're doing. And so you do that by serving them
Mhm.
into the vision that the whole is reaching towards.
Yes. And when we hear servant leadership, and we talk about it a lot in our classes, and it is almost ultimately always associated with terms such as like humanitarian. A lot of religious leaders, like just about every religious leader, was a servant leader, and they believed and they acted in a manner that said, "I am no better than anybody that I will interact with, and they are no better than me. If I truly want them to succeed, I need to get down to their level or beneath their level and lift them back up. And if I can do those things, and I recognize the trouble of everyone below me, like we talked about last week, if I put away my privilege and use it to show my responsibility and act on that responsibility, I am better suited to lift up the masses and be a leader." And we saw that with Jesus, going out and listening and hearing the people cry out and saying, "Nope, this person needs me." And people being shocked at like that individual? No, not some every individual, especially that individual. Right? So to kind of go into to put Zay on the spot here, say when I said inspire a shared vision, does Jesus do that? And if he does that, how does he do it?
I mean, yes is the first answer. Um,
That's shocking.
Duh.
Easy. I got that one. A plus.
God, yes, no.
Yes, Jesus does do that. God does that. Do you mean example of him in the Bible, or do you mean now in us as Christians?
Either way.
Okay. Um, while he was here on earth, in his ministry, his inspiration. Let's see. I would say there were like two key parts with his disciples, and one was the inspiring them to be like him, and then the inspiring them to be able to go on when he was gone. And that throughout his ministry, he set them up in such a way that he set them up for success in ministry without them knowing, even though sometimes he kind of said it pretty bluntly, like, I'm leaving. And they're like, yeah, but that's when you're going to kill all the Romans, right? They didn't quite get it, but he was inspiring a vision of their ministry that they didn't actually understand until it was happening. And then when he died, when he rose again, when the tongues of fire fell down, it like clicked because he had actually been putting all the key pieces of his vision in them throughout his ministry. And that's something that obviously as humans we would love to be able to imitate.
Hmm.
How awesome would it be if I'm a leader that I could actually hide the secrets of my vision in parables, in actions, in
Yes.
conversations, in such a way that when the person's ready to do it, that's when they actually understand the vision.
Yes.
We can't really do that. Usually we have to kind of define a vision, write it down, repeat it as we go throughout projects that we can actually keep it in mind. But obviously Jesus gets to do it that way because he's God. So yeah, he did that throughout it, and the inspiration wasn't just the vision, but also he empowered them and showed them how capable they are by inviting them into the process. Said,
Hmm.
why don't you pray for the demons to go out? I'm going to send you out and go, not
Right.
just the 12, but like he empowered people to go out and do the same works he was doing so that they could see miracles happen firsthand. And the leader does that. That's how you inspire vision, isn't just by teaching it or showing it,
Mhm.
it's by allowing them to be part of it.
Okay. So two of the chapters that the terms for the chapters that you discuss within the question I just asked you are envision the future and enlisting others. And so you covered both of those things. And so I think that's really, really that's really cool. Um,
A plus.
because the question that I'm essentially arguing tonight, people love facts, right? When you doubt, we have these doubts, we love facts, we got to prove it. So I'm essentially posing the question, which one of these things came first? It's a chicken or the egg question. Is it modern day science proved to us that this is what leadership is, and coincidentally, Jesus was that image, was that thing, that example, or was Jesus the example that all of our now modern day contemporary ideas of leadership stemmed from? And with certain forms of leadership, such as servant leadership, the answer is already there. It stemmed from Jesus. Jesus came from this thing. He gave us this. But when we think about transformational leadership, transactional leadership, leader member exchange, we think about some of these terms and it starts to get a little convoluted because parts of it draw from certain places, but parts of it kind of draw from others. So, Chris, my question for you now is when you think about enabling others to act, that part of the question, that's the part of the question that you had already kind of started to answer. Um, Foster collaboration and strengthen others. How did Jesus do those things? We know he did them.
Hmm.
Focus specifically on strengthening others. What were the methods that Jesus used as a leader to go out and strengthen other people?
Um, well, I mean, just one kind of example that pops into my head is when the disciples saw him walking on the water, and they were they were all scared and freaking out. And he said, he told them, "Be calm, it's me." And Peter said, "If it's really you, tell me to come out there, and I will walk out to you." And Jesus, without hesitation, said, "Come." And Peter started walking, and he was walking on the water. Um, and then, as soon as Peter got scared and lost his faith and fell in the water, he said, "Jesus, save me." And Jesus was right there to catch him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, both of those two things together are so much of that enabling others, is because it's something, you know, the disciples had never imagined themselves walking on water. That was not something that they had planned on. That was not a goal in their mind. That was
Right.
not something they believed that they could do. Um, and so Jesus showed them, you know, encouraged them, pushed them to do it, said, "Do it," and then gave them the support and the uh, backup for if they, to give them that chance to try, and then if they failed, to be there to catch them and make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So essentially, and what I like about this is, as a leader, Jesus made sure that his followers were never set up for failure. They were never put in a position where their failure would essentially mean you're done. And we see that in the ultimate form with Jesus on the cross. Our failure is not going to be our demise. We are not going to be destroyed because of these failures that we have. We are given the strength and given the opportunity to rise above these weaknesses, to rise above these defeats, and become what we were meant to be, and find this identity and find this person. Um, I want to slowly start to shift because I liked your first question before when you talked about that divide. Um, there is a big divide between um, and I can't I want to like I want to come up with a term for this between essentially Christians and non-Christians. And I want to come up with like a more fluid term for that. But there is a divide because if I call it the real world, that where everybody's in the real world. But so there's like the modern business world, and then there's the Christianity, the world that Christians live in. And it's the same world, but the modern world wants us to believe that our ideologies and beliefs are actually bashing against each other, that there is no mutual flow. And Zay, I don't know if you would agree or disagree with me on this, so I'm going to pose this out there. Would you feel that the modern world doesn't look at the way the church is leading, but rather focuses on the issues that the church has a stance on? Or is the modern world critiquing leadership in itself within the church?
I would think I'm. Let me say this in a way that's not offensive. I think it would be very difficult for you to look at the way, I'll call it, mainstream media treats the church and Christians, that it's ever a impartial review of what is happening.
Okay.
I think as far as leadership goes, the focus is far, far and away focused on people who are in the church and in ministry, especially their mistakes, and what churches are doing with issues. Like you said, I think the focus is definitely on what are their stances and how can we make the church seem as judgmental as possible.
Right, because if you were really a leader, say, if you're really a good person, you'd let women do whatever they wanted.
For sure, and every church I've been in has had women leaders. So like,
Right.
but people will look at subsects of church or different and say, well, look, because the Bible said this in these two places, we don't understand, and they don't bother to find out what that means. And because some churches won't let women teach, well, then clearly they're all sexist, and
Right.
that's kind of a common worldly view, real world view. But I also don't think that all people agree with that. Although, unfortunately, the world we live in, people are much more likely to parrot things that already line up with what they believe and to actually do any study or understanding for themselves, which has been proven time and time again with all sorts of social media and especially in politics, right? We've proven it the past couple elections that it actually doesn't matter what you post as long as someone agrees with what it's trying to say. They won't even bother to read it; they'll just share it. Um, I think that's how a lot of people see the church. So it is unfortunate because I do think overall the church is actually a great place to look for how leadership should look, um, because it's one of the few places I've seen where people are actually striving to lead, not just manage. And when they do well, usually they are followed. And when they do poorly, they either do better, grow, and usually, admit fault. That happens more in the church than, and again, this is all my church experience. I've also been in churches where that's not true. There's a lot of performance. It is just management and business. And so I'm not trying to tell someone who went to a church and saw something happen that that's not true. But overall, I think that we as Christians do strive to step into what leadership really should be, not just parroting and managing and performing.
Right. Chris, you mentioned earlier when you're using Jesus as an example, and you didn't explicitly state it, but you're talking about how we are all followers of Christ. And being a follower of Christ, what does that mean we are supposed to be doing as a follower of Christ?
Um, well, I think one of the biggest things, obviously, it starts with the very the very first part of that is acknowledging that I can't do this on my own, and I need Jesus to save me and to redeem me. And so it's actually once you have acknowledged that and truly believe that, it becomes a lot easier to follow because you have already acknowledged that Jesus is more capable in this place. Jesus is more um, able. And so from that, you then say, okay, well, what is Jesus teaching me? And so your responsibility as a follower is to say, um, Jesus, God, I want to go where you are leading. So what do I need to do? And obviously, from that, we get that from reading the Bible and from prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to start with reading the Bible and reading what Jesus taught and how he taught us to approach the world and to interact with others. And then when it comes to, the more specific situations, that prayer and seeking God's will and seeking to understand his guidance and where he wants you to go in those moments.
Mm-hmm. And I know that when we read through the Bible, we learn that planning and praying go hand in hand. When
Oh
we
yeah,
seek to make plans out, we're asking for that
never
reassurance.
make plans out there.
Yes, they're saying they might as well be the same word. They're not, but they should be pretty close to being the same thing. Um,
Yes.
so staying with you real quick, and then I'm gonna say a little bit different of a question. Where, as a follower of Christ, and where are you going?
Mhm. Um, Ultimately, to me, it goes back again, like we said, to the Great Commission, where he said, "Go and make disciples of all nations," um, and going back to um, those two commandments that he said are the most important commandments. So those three things together, I think, are the goal and the vision. Um, so on a personal level, you are going towards loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is the goal on a personal level of what you should be doing, what should be striving for and reaching towards. Um, and then on the interpersonal level, it's love your neighbor as yourself. And so striving to um, every encounter you have, um, reaching to be interact in a more loving manner, to be more like Jesus in your interactions with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the world macro level, the vision is reaching everybody,
Mm-hmm.
showing everybody God's love, showing them that despite everything they may have seen in their lives, they are loved, they are valued, and God wants a relationship with them, and He wants them to be a part of His heaven, His world.
Right.
So
Good answer. One of the things we cover so much, and we always keep reverting back to when you, especially anything, you learn the fundamentals of it, is that it's so important as a leader to really know where you're going and not a physical place. I'm going in a direction that encompasses values, characteristics, morals. It has to incorporate my relationships with other people. It has to incorporate bringing them along. In the modern world, the business world, it does have to incorporate a little bit of finance transactions. Like you can't, if your business goes under, you can't lead anybody anywhere. Um,
yeah,
so it's just interesting to hear your thoughts on that being a follower, because yes, we are physically following Jesus, but in that, we are following more than just the individual. We are following a standard that he has set, morals, values, a code of ethics, and it's something that I've seen people really want to butt heads with when they throw that argument out of you shouldn't need religion to be a good person. You should just be a good person. And it's to some extent, sadly, a valid argument because we have seen individuals or groups of individuals that do need that, and it's sad, but if it's getting the job done, it's getting the job done. But I also think to an extent it's wildly untrue because what we're discovering tonight is that leadership got its stances from Jesus, from the church. So leadership within the church gave us leadership that we have now. And it's the other way around. People make those claims towards Christians, towards the church, towards anyone of any religious denomination, and they're a hypocrite because they're unaware that they're actually developing their own code of morals and leadership skills from religious leaders. Zay, one of the things we didn't talk about, challenging the process. Does Jesus challenge the process? And if he does, which process is he challenging?
Well, actually, co-teaching slash that was weird. Preaching our series this December for Christmas is actually on God valuing process or valuing the journey. Um, and I know that the term challenge the process isn't necessarily just about process, but it is involved. Anyways, all that to say, Jesus definitely challenges the process. God is definitely involved in always challenging. I think it is very clear if you read through the Bible that there isn't such thing as a healthy person who is not growing. It makes it very clear that apathy or stagnation or desire for comfort are all opposite of what's going to be healthy, helpful, and valuable to you as a person, to your personal well-being, to your ability to love yourself, to love your neighbors, to love God. If you aren't growing, you're actually dying. Like there isn't like this in between of I'm just going to be comfortable for a while. So Jesus is active in challenging the process, challenging the way we do things, because if we're just going to do things the same way, it's not going to work out. As far as like examples of how he does that, I mean, he when the Jews were left alone with the Torah, by the time Jesus came around, the Sadducees, Pharisees, which were their human-made sects of priests, right? The priesthood, it was something around 240 something, I think. I can't remember the number of laws that was given in the Old Testament and Levitical law and the Torah. By the time Jesus came around, they were at over 800 laws. So we had added all these laws. So it wasn't actually God's law anymore. It was mostly man's law. And a lot of man's law had to do with like segregating females, the sick and needy, and all. But anyways, it was all about control, and it was all out of fear because it was all driven by this fear of if you mess up, God's gonna get you. You're not
How?
gonna get to heaven. Jesus challenged that. I mean, at one point he literally tossed tables, but he went. He didn't avoid the Pharisees. He went to the Pharisees' house. He sat down and he said, "You know whose responsibility it is for the good of the people? It's yours, and you've been doing a really bad job of it. And if you don't change, you're the ones who will be punished the most. And the people you led astray will actually have a chance to come back." He said it all through parables, if you're interested. I just did teaching on one last week in Luke 14. But the Pharisees knew. They studied parables. They actually knew how to see, and they would say, there's that, parts in scripture where it says the Pharisees knew he was talking about them, right? Like he challenged the way humans had decided to create their own religion and saying like, this isn't the way to do it. This isn't how you get to heaven. This isn't how you love God. You should be doing it differently. And the way that he showed to do things was very relational and involved and messy, so to speak. There wasn't set rules because he did the same healing 4 different ways. He showed the disciples, guidelines of how to live life, but really just pointed them in direction and said, go. As long as you're going, you're doing well. And so that's how he challenged the growth in the process, was by driving it.
Right. And when we talk about challenging the process, where our leadership talks about not challenging the process within yourself of becoming a leader, but it's as a leader, how do you challenge the process around you? You put yourself in a leadership position and you realize things aren't really going the way that they should be going. It's not the most effective. How do you step forth and make your voice heard and challenge the process? And one of the best things, another plug, this one is not shameful. This is my favorite book ever. This is Intelligent Disobedience, Ira Chaliff. If you have not, if you work anywhere, if you literally work anywhere, if you literally do anything, this book is not very big. I encourage you to get this book. I encourage you to read it. Um, to give you an idea of what this book talks about, we are not only leaders in one situation, we're going to be leading at some point in our life. We're all followers. Every single person is a follower. Now, this particular argument and ideology isn't going to apply to us being as followers in Christ, but it's interesting to see how it applies to us following and interacting with the rest of the world. And what he says is, take seeing eye dogs. We are all seeing eye dogs. And what does a seeing eye dog have to first learn how to do? It has to learn how to take commands. And once a seeing eye dog can take all these commands, the next thing, and the more important thing a seeing eye dog has to do, is know when to disobey commands. When do I not do this thing I was told to do? Such as your handler tells you to go. And if you step out on the curb, there's a car coming, and you're both going to die. If the dog obeys that command, they're both dead. If the dog disobeys that command, the handler knows something's coming. I'm not supposed to be walking. Everything's good. So he talks about in that role, we have to intelligently disobey the rules that are being set forth through us when they come into conflict with what we are supposed to be doing. Because as a leader, people are not following you. They are following your vision. They are following this example that you're modeling. They're going somewhere past you, beyond you. And so when your leader screws up, it's not your responsibility to gossip about them behind their back and not get anything done. And it's not your responsibility to walk up to them and be like, you're a moron. Why would you do this? Like, I'm done listening to you. Your responsibility is to bring it to their attention and say, are you aware that you're doing this thing? Are you aware that you're kind of leading us off course? And what most people don't. Most people just sit, they keep their mouth shut, it's not my problem, and they watch the world burn around them. And they fail to realize that person's driving your vehicle. They're about to drive off the bridge, and you're in the car with them. And you're sitting in the passenger seat going, this idiot's about to drive off the bridge. You're going to die with them. And we don't have that mentality. We don't have that. And we see the example that Jesus set of saying, with the concept of the rich man, right? You have all this money in the world. Is this rich man going to get into heaven? Is his riches alone going to get him there, right? Because the poor are the people who are truly lifted up in faith and in spirit, and we should be reaching out to them and doing those things. That's just kind of like my little tidbit, because my master's thesis is going to be on that book, and I'm hoping to get in touch with Ira Chaliff at some point. So we talked about a lot of stuff.
One thing on that, real quick,
Yes.
is that relationship right there, what you're talking about, has to be based in trust.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
It's based in trust. You have to, as a follower, you have to put trust in your leader and show your leader that you do trust them. And as a leader, you have to be willing to trust your followers as well. There has to be, and that's so much of what's not present in a lot of modern day leader follower relationships, is that um, the follower is just waiting for the leaders to screw up, and the leaders are trying to over control everything because they don't trust their followers to do
Right.
what they're asking.
They don't want their position taken away from them because their position gives them something. 100% agree. So, Chris, staying with you then, with everything that we've talked about, we've come to the question we've been trying to answer all night. Which one of these solves the problem? You mentioned at the beginning we do have a problem in society with leadership. We have a problem with people getting greedy, with people taking advantage of things, abusing their privilege, and not taking any responsibility for the duties around them. We see it with abortion. We see it with gun control. We see it with immigration. Like any political thing that you could see on the news, anything you scroll through Twitter and find, we see it. And we're all over the spectrum as kind of viewers in this of our stances. So if let's not even say which one solves the problem, because I think we came to the conclusion that Jesus is the way and it lines up with our ways. How does Jesus's example of leadership solve this problem, and how do we apply it?
Well, I think the best example of that is in Jesus and his entire purpose for coming to earth. He came to die for our sins.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at as he got closer to that point in his life, um, like Zay said, he started talking to his disciples about it. He started talking about what was going to happen, what the plan was. Um, they didn't want it. They didn't like that plan. They didn't agree with it, but they still followed him. And then when it came down to time for it to happen, when Jesus was praying in Gethsemane, he said, God, I don't want to do this. That's a paraphrase, obviously, but he said, God, this is your will. I understand this is your plan. I don't want to do this. If there's a different way, can we do it a different way?
Mm-hmm.
This is not what I would want to do.
Right.
But he says, it is your will. I yield to your will. And so I think when you're looking at the world, modern world, we just lose sight of that. We get caught up with, I like it this way. I want it to go this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just end up with this uh, everybody seeking their own will and their own ideal and their own vision. And as you said, it never lines up.
It doesn't ever. Yeah,
And so
correct.
having that end thing of what is God's will, and then we can all aim at that, and things get a lot better.
I think things would be a lot better. Um, we watch. I know people watch Zay pop out right here. Zay's in the process of buying a house, and we're wishing him the best of luck on that. And he's going to be receiving information on closing. So he told us ahead of time you might have to drop out, and so that's what he's doing. Don't worry, we know that we've lost him. We'll go get a house, right? We wish him the best. Continue with what you're saying. Like, I really do feel like that this is where a lot of the disagreement comes in, because when you attempt to bring forth the example that Jesus set and you attempt to communicate that to other people, this is the reason I wanted to do this show. They as soon as they start to feel it come off your tongue that this is about to be a religious conversation, they shut down, they back out. You're wrong. There's absolutely no way. I'm refusing it. Right? The walls come up. There's no way that you could possibly have any idea what you're talking about. To communicate it to them in a manner that is Jesus' example. This is exactly what he wanted. This is God's will. This is his plan. You just didn't realize you're already doing it. You didn't realize that all these things that you want, that's what he was. It's what he is. It's what he's doing. And I think about the issues and the problems that I'm encountering right now. And when you learn as a leader how to go through problem solving and change, the first thing that you get taught to do is to identify what the problem is. Okay? Jesus comes down. I'm not here to collect the righteous. I'm here to call the sinners to repentance. Okay? He has identified the problem. He knows why he's here. Then it's start to address that problem with everybody else. And he does. Jesus collects disciples. He calls people out. He tells them to make the fishers of men. He has this mindset. He's got all these people. He has a team of people that are going to get ready to do this. Well, then it kind of falls into our realm a little bit, because once you start to address the problem, you start butting heads with people. And the more you butt heads with people, the further up the chain you might have to take that problem. But sort of like the question that Jeremiah kept asking, when do I stop doing this thing? Because if I'm right, I kind of want to just keep going until I'm right. I want to just prove to you that I'm right. And sometimes I can't do that thing. And we struggle to know as individuals, when do I walk away from the job and the career that I have right now? And when do I keep fighting that fight? When is it worth bettering the lives of the people around me? Right? Somebody breaks a company policy or they do something illegal and you immediately are the whistleblower. You come out, you go up the chain, you call your direct boss, send him an email, hey, this thing happened, I want to talk to you about it. Your boss dismisses it, they sweep it under the rug. You have two choices. My boss dealt with it, it's not my problem. I do the moral, ethical thing, the right thing, and address it up the chain of command. Taking that action, knowing you could lose your job. You could go over your boss's head, their supervisor talks to your boss fires you, and it's over. Or you get over the top, they deal with it, and the other person gets swept out. And this is, it's weird to kind of go into another topic now, but we also have this issue of people choosing to be leaders to enact vengeance upon other people and do things out of spite of somebody else. And that's just, I mean, I'm not going to say, Chris, isn't that wrong? That's absolutely wrong, right?
Obviously.
It's absolutely wrong. So when Jesus encountered that and he interacted with people who wanted to be right or wanted to be with Jesus to seek, I mean, we hear people in their prayers they call out, right? Lord, my enemies are vast and they surround me. Bring down your vengeance and your fury. Give them the sword, strike them down. Is it the vengeance? How is that different from me wanting somebody fired for screwing up? That's a big question, right? I
Yeah.
like when I ask big questions.
I mean, it's just a lot to.
All right,
There's a
so
lot more in
yeah,
that. A lot more to get to.
so we'll break it down. How do we use Jesus's model to not seek vengeance upon other people, even though we know they're wrong, we know they screwed up, we know they deserve to be fired? How do we walk through that process, knowing someone might lose their job, without having that vengeance?
Um, well, I think ultimately it comes down to um, kind of as we've talked about modeling it and um, I mean, there's a few different things that pop up in my mind. Peter, bless Peter. Peter struggled a lot, but he was also very enthusiastic, and so there's a lot of good teaching points when it comes to Peter. Um, Jesus says before during the Last Supper, Jesus says to Peter, you will deny me 3 times, and Peter says, no, I would never do
Right?
that.
There's no way.
But Jesus says you will, and then he kind of moves on. Like he doesn't. There's nothing else in that. And then it comes to pass. Peter does it, um, and then after Jesus's death and resurrection, Peter is the one he chooses to lead the church. Like, how could that concept for us? Like, how if you think about it in your own life,
Right? We would
if you
never
had
have
somebody
somebody do that.
so if you had somebody so completely betray you like that like they literally left you to die, and somehow you get out of it and you come back to them, are you really going to just forgive them and say, I believe that you can be better than that?
Right? It's
And
essentially
that
your only witness in a crime, who all they have to do is testify. No, he was with me. He's not. He's not the shooter. And they're like, I've never seen this guy in my life. And you're like,
yeah,
what? I gotta go to jail
yeah.
now? Zay, you want to make a
If I
point?
Sorry,
could
guys.
jump in real,
Yeah,
I just want to point out that Jesus also gave him the opportunity to say that he would commit to Jesus 3 times. He asked Peter,
yes.
"Do you
Do you
love
love
me?"
me?
3 times on the shore after he appeared to them again in the flesh. And so Peter gets the opportunity to say, "Yes, I love you," and then, "Yes, I love you," and like Jesus, you know that I love you. And some people might be like, "Well, that's weird that Jesus is making him pay back, kind of," but like it's actually an opportunity for Peter
To redeem
because
himself,
as he
yeah.
goes, yeah, like it's healing his shame
Yeah.
because he feels so guilty, and yet And that's Jesus' response. After the third time, Peter says, "You know that I love you," and he uses agape, and he says, like, "You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Lead my," he says, "Lead my church, feed my sheep," and then he says, like, "Lead my church," and he's like, "You're going to be the cornerstone of what I build my church on, and I give you an opportunity to come out of the shame of rejecting me and actually declare the fact that you don't, that you actually love me instead." And
Yeah.
like that's true leadership building up.
Yes. So when there's many different types of leadership when we learn about them, and there's many different approaches people take, even within like being a humanitarian. Um, Humanitarians can tackle the problem a little bit differently, right? Because we talked about those five major things. Some people are better at inspiring a vision. Some people are better leaders when they inspire a vision. Some people are better at just expressing their morals and their values and just having people really want to be them. I just really like who you are. You're a great person. You're a great individual. I want to be like you. Sometimes we enjoy people who are better at challenging the process. They might be not as great at pulling other people in, but they're really good at changing the world around them, and people like that. So it comes without saying that there's also a lot of debate in what the actual problem is within leadership. And so, Zay, when you ducked out, and we had our fingers crossed for you, buddy, I asked Chris, what is the problem in our society with leadership, and how does Jesus solve that problem? So I'm going to ask you that same question. Your mic is muted, so I'm going to give you a second so you can hear me, but I will give you a second. Um, think about that question. What to you is, if you had to pick the major one, right? So yes, there's a whole bunch of problems with our leadership. What's like the big one that you would tackle first, and how would Jesus and you tackle it?
I think the biggest issue would be performance, trying to lead based to get something out of someone, out of a group of people, out of whatever. This idea of I am trying to do what I need to do in order to get something. And to combat that, I think it really has to be about, like, leadership has to be about connection and relationship, the way Jesus did it and the way he said to do it, right? Love and love. Um, and I believe that like it flips everything out because you can still have a goal. You still have things that need to get done. You can still, like, okay, the church has to get cleaned, right? Like there's still stuff that has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
We still have to set up the tables and chairs. Like that part doesn't change, but the way it's communicated, the way that we do it, the way that I talk about it is all changed if I do it out of true leadership, which is based in connection and relationship, as opposed to the what can we do and getting stuff done.
Yeah, and a great example of that as we start to wrap things up um, is two leaders.
Yeah, I gotta wrap it
Yeah,
up.
two leaders were given the opportunity to tell an entire company that we're about to lay off a bunch of people. Okay, one leader walks out of the meeting and everybody's disgruntled, just, and another leader is able to walk out of the meeting and everybody's cheering. So then people ask, wait, what did you say to them? And the second leader walked into the meeting and embodied that burden. I understand what's happening. This is horrible. I don't want people to have to lose their jobs because I know what that feels like. I don't want it to be anybody in here. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to band together. We're not going to lose anybody. We're going to agree to take X% pay cuts from each of these individuals because we are a family and we are in this together. And just like you said, it's not about what I'm getting. I am here to make your lives better. As a leader, I'm here to give you guys the resources to succeed. And by doing that, we can tackle the world. And it's what Jesus comes and calls us to do. He's given us the resources. He's given us the tools. And he's also here if we have any questions so that we can go out and do our job and fill the role as disciples. Um, Anybody else have any closing points? Yeah,
Not
you're
really.
like close.
I
We
mean,
we talked about a
that
lot of
was
stuff.
yeah, that was pretty good. I do just want to say, I think, like you were talking about, Tim, people have different strengths in that. And so we've talked a lot about Jesus, but there are lots of other leaders in the Bible, and I think they all, like you said, they all have different elements of what we've talked about. And so you can see they all led in different ways and they all accomplished different things.
Hmm.
But the one thing that threaded through all of them is that when they were succeeding, it was when they were striving for God's will and not their will.
Great point. It's an
So,
amazing point. And the lives of everyone else around them were being bettered.
yeah,
My closing point would just be like, we talked a lot about Jesus specifically, but the reality is anywhere we say Jesus, you could interject God, and that like
true.
he is the source, and that this all existed before Jesus walked the earth.
Right.
Jesus and God are so not, just that like
Yes.
our true source of leadership existed before we did.
Hmm.
And before there was history, before we have anything written down, and that you can see that throughout all of the Bible, as well as getting to know God, you get to know what leadership is because that's who He is. It's part of who He is.
Absolutely. And he embodied it so that we could take a chance at seeing it. Um,
Right.
so next week, we have all decided that we're going to take a pass. We're going to use this as our kind of a Thanksgiving break. So we hope you guys get some rest. We hope you guys enjoy the holiday and give thanks, and you just are surrounded by everything that you need and want, that you get the opportunity to spend time with your family and the people you care about and the loved ones. And you're just given an opportunity to really appreciate all the great things that God has given you and that God has done in your life. And you do take that opportunity to celebrate that and not be scared to, revel in joy for all of those things. When we get back, when we come back in 2 weeks, we have talked about a lot of the foundations and the groundwork. And I think in 2 weeks, we're not going to focus more on specific topics, but we're going to take the topics that we've covered as our foundation and start weaving them through questions. Questions from how does this one thing apply in my life? Questions that I've really asked a lot of these guys, things with overcoming shame of my sin, with overcoming burdens that I have, with even the question my brother asked me, why do I have to accept this person to get into heaven if I am in fact a good person? So if you guys have any questions, again, feel free to comment them, message them to us. If you're our friends, you shoot them to us on any social media platform that we have. You can shoot us an email. I'll get the email posted below to our little group. This way, all three of us can see it. If you like it, again, hit the subscribe button, share the video. We've heard from a lot of you already, and we're super grateful for that. We're blessed to have had these opportunities, and we just hope everybody has an amazing Thanksgiving. From me, Chris, Isaiah, we love everybody, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.